Daniel Ritchie stood in the parking lot of the Pinewood Mountain Resort, his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel of his Honda Accord. He was 41 years old, a senior product manager at a mid-sized tech firm in Austin, Texas, earning a comfortable $110,000 a year. Until 20 minutes ago, he had believed he was about to pull off the perfect romantic surprise for his wife of 12 years. Now everything he believed about his marriage was crumbling around him. His wife Diana was a marketing director at Preston & Associates, one of Austin's most prestigious advertising agencies, pulling in around $140,000 annually. She had been thrilled when her company announced their annual 3-day executive retreat at this luxury resort in the Texas Hill Country. It's all about team bonding and strategic planning, she had told Daniel over breakfast last Tuesday, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Honestly, it's mostly boring presentations, but the resort is supposed to be gorgeous. Daniel had smiled and kissed her goodbye that Friday morning, watching her silver Lexus SUV disappear down their street. Then he had executed his plan, the surprise he had been plotting for 2 weeks. He had taken the afternoon off work, packed an overnight bag, picked up Diana's favorite white orchids from the florist on Congress Avenue, and driven the 90 miles to Pinewood Mountain Resort. He had even called ahead to confirm her room number, spinning a story about wanting to send her a surprise gift. The cheerful receptionist had been happy to help, gushing about how romantic it was. Daniel had felt like husband of the year during that drive, imagining Diana's face when he knocked on her door. Maybe they would have dinner at the resort's acclaimed restaurant. Maybe they would take a moonlit walk through the grounds. Maybe they would recapture some of that spark that had been dimming lately under the weight of their demanding careers. He had arrived at the resort around 4:30 p.m., checking into his own room first to freshen up. The place was indeed stunning, a sprawling property of stone and timber, buildings nestled among oak trees and limestone cliffs, the kind of place that cost serious money, probably $400 a night minimum. Preston & Associates clearly did not cheap out on their executive retreats. At 6:15 p.m., Daniel had made his way to Building C, Room 217, where Diana was supposedly staying. He had climbed the exterior stairs, orchids in hand, heart full of anticipation. That's when he heard it. The noise came through the door, unmistakable, rhythmic, accompanied by breathless sounds that Daniel knew intimately. His wife's voice crying out in pleasure. But there was another voice too. A man's voice, deep and confident, saying things that made Daniel's blood run cold. God, Diana, I've wanted this for months. Daniel froze, the orchids slipping from his numb fingers. They hit the concrete walkway with a soft thud, white petals scattering. He stood there, paralyzed, as the sounds continued. His mind raced through impossible explanations. Maybe it was the TV. Maybe it was the room next door. Maybe he'd heard wrong. But he knew the truth. He'd known it the instant he heard her voice. His hand moved almost involuntarily to his pocket. Pulling out his phone, he opened the voice recording app, something he'd installed months ago for work meetings, but had rarely used. With shaking fingers, he pressed record and held the phone near the door. The sounds continued for another 3 minutes. 3 minutes that felt like 3 hours. 3 minutes that destroyed 12 years of marriage. Then came a male voice, clearer now. We should probably get back downstairs before people start wondering where we are. Diana's laugh, that musical laugh Daniel loved, responded. H5 more minutes. Besides, everyone thinks I'm resting before the dinner session, and you told them you had calls to make. You're going to get me in trouble, Mrs. Ritchie. That's Director Ritchie to you, Mr. Bradford, Diana teased, at least during work hours. Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. Jason Bradford. Diana's boss? The charismatic founder and CEO of Preston & Associates, known throughout Austin's business community as a marketing genius and serial entrepreneur. The man was probably worth several $1 million, drove a Porsche 911, and had been divorced twice. Diana had mentioned him constantly over the past year. Jason says this, Jason thinks that, Jason wants the team to... Daniel had met him once at the company Christmas party last year. Bradford had been charming, complimentary about Diana's work, friendly toward Daniel. They'd shaken hands. The man had looked Daniel in the eye and smiled while apparently planning to sleep with his wife. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge, Shocking betrayals and justice against the powerful. I've poured my heart into creating this story just for you. But if everyone who enjoyed it just walked away without support, channels like mine wouldn't survive to bring you more. Don't let that happen. Hit subscribe now to never miss out on the next video. Smash that like button as well and drop a comment with where you are watching from. It's a tiny gesture like this that means the world to me and keeps the magic alive. Daniel backed away from the door, his mind spinning. He made his way down the stairs on autopilot, barely aware of his surroundings. He needed to think. He needed to process. He needed to figure out what the hell he was going to do. He found himself in his car, sitting in the darkening parking lot, listening to the recording he'd made. Each word was crystal clear. Each sound was undeniable. He played it 3 times, as if repetition might somehow change what he was hearing. His phone buzzed. A text from Diana. Dinner presentation running long. Love you. The casual lie made something snap inside Daniel. She wasn't even good at it. Wasn't even trying. How long had this been going on? How many late meetings and team bonding sessions had been cover stories? Daniel opened his phone's photo app and began scrolling through recent pictures. There, a selfie Diana had sent him 2 weeks ago from what she'd called a boring corporate lunch. In the background, slightly out of focus, was Jason Bradford looking at Diana with an expression that Daniel now recognized. Not professional. Not appropriate. Hungry. There was another photo from a month ago. Diana at what she described as a client dinner. But Daniel could see Bradford's reflection in the restaurant window behind her. And another from 6 weeks back. Diana in workout clothes she'd supposedly worn to her Saturday yoga class. Except Daniel could now see a man's expensive watch on the edge of the frame. The same distinctive Rolex Submariner he'd noticed on Bradford's wrist at that Christmas party. The evidence had been there all along. He'd just been too trusting to see it. Daniel sat in his car until nearly 8:01 p.m., forming and discarding plans. Part of him wanted to storm back to that room, pound on the door, confront them both. But another part, the part that had made him successful in his career, the part that thought strategically and planned ahead, told him to wait. Confronting them now would give them time to prepare, to coordinate stories, to minimize damage. Diana would cry, apologize, maybe blame him for working too much or not being attentive enough. Bradford would probably fire her to avoid a lawsuit, and she'd come home devastated, begging for another chance. No, Daniel needed to be smarter than that. He started his car and drove back to Austin in a daze, his mind churning through possibilities. He couldn't just ignore this. He couldn't pretend he didn't know. But he also wasn't going to play the role of the shocked, emotional husband who made rash decisions. They thought he was clueless. They thought he was safe at home, probably watching football or playing video games, completely unaware that his wife was sleeping, with her boss at a luxury resort on the company dime. They had no idea what was coming. Daniel arrived home around 10 p.m. The condo felt different now, hollow, staged, like a set from a play rather than a real home. He looked at their wedding photo on the wall. Diana in her white dress, both of them so young and hopeful. He'd been 29, she'd been 28. They'd promised forever. He made himself coffee and opened his laptop. First he Googled Texas divorce law, community property state. Everything acquired during the marriage would be split 50-50, unless he could prove fault. Adultery was grounds for fault-based divorce in Texas, which could affect property division and alimony. Next, he researched Jason Bradford. The man's company, Preston & Associates, had gone public 3 years ago. Bradford owned approximately 40% of the shares, worth roughly $15 million based on current stock prices. He had a reputation as a brilliant marketer, but also as someone who played fast and loose with corporate ethics. There had been a lawsuit 2 years ago. Sexual harassment. Allegations from a former employee that had been settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Daniel's analytical mind started piecing together a strategy. He needed more evidence. He needed documentation. He needed to be absolutely certain of what he was dealing with before he made his move. He created a new folder on his laptop. Password protected, labeled Project Phoenix. Into it, he uploaded the voice recording from the resort. Then he began systematically going through Diana's social media, their shared credit card statements, anything that might show a pattern. The statements were revealing. Dinners at expensive restaurants on nights Diana claimed to be working late. Hotel charges that Diana had explained as client entertainment expenses. A $200 charge at a lingerie boutique on 6th Street. Daniel had never seen any new lingerie. His phone buzzed. A Diana calling. He stared at her photo on the screen. That beautiful smile. Those warm brown eyes he'd fallen in love with. The woman he'd built a life with. The woman who was probably lying in bed with another man right now. He let it go to voicemail. "Hey, babe," her voice said cheerfully. "Just wanted to say goodnight. The presentations today were exhausting. I'm about to crash. Love you so much. See you tomorrow afternoon." Daniel saved the voicemail. More evidence for Project Phoenix. He stayed up until 3 a.m. that night. Researching, planning, documenting. He found the name of a divorce attorney, Catherine Morrison, known as one of the toughest in Austin, with a reputation for destroying unfaithful spouses in court. Her consultation fee was $500, but her track record was impeccable. He also found something else interesting. Preston and Associates had a strict ethics policy that explicitly prohibited romantic relationships between supervisors and subordinates. It was right there in the employee handbook, which was publicly available on their website. Violation could result in termination and forfeiture of certain stock options. If Bradford was sleeping with Diana, he was risking millions of dollars. Either he was incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid. Maybe both. Daniel finally went to bed around 3:30 a.m., but sleep wouldn't come. He lay in their king-size bed, the one they'd picked out together at a furniture store in Round Rock, arguing playfully about firm versus soft mattresses, and stared at the ceiling. Part of him still couldn't believe it. Part of him wanted to wake up and discover this was all a horrible nightmare. But the recording on his phone was real. The credit card charges were real. The lies were real. By the time dawn broke over Austin, Daniel had made his decision. He wasn't going to confront Diana immediately. He wasn't going to let his emotions drive his actions. He was going to do this the smart way. He was going to let them think they'd gotten away with it. He was going to smile and play the devoted husband. And while they got comfortable and careless, he was going to build an airtight case that would destroy them both. What happened next would shock everyone, especially Diana and Jason Bradford. They thought Daniel Ritchie was just a nice guy, a trusting husband, maybe a little boring and predictable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Diana came home Saturday afternoon with her designer luggage and a guilty smile, full of stories about boring presentations and corporate team-building exercises. Daniel greeted her with a kiss and asked all the right questions, watching her lie to his face with an ease that made his stomach turn. "How was your weekend?" she asked, kicking off her heels in the entryway. "Quiet," Daniel said truthfully. "Caught up on some work, watched a couple movies. Missed you." She hugged him, and he could smell expensive cologne on her neck. Not his brand. "I missed you too. God, I need a real shower." Resort water pressure was terrible. Daniel watched her disappear into their bathroom, heard the shower start, and felt something harden inside his chest. This was really happening. His wife was standing in their shower, washing away evidence of her betrayal while casually lying about water pressure. He spent the weekend playing the role of attentive husband while his mind worked, furiously behind the facade. He needed to be methodical. One recording wasn't enough. A good lawyer could argue it was taken out of context or question its authenticity. He needed a pattern. He needed undeniable proof. Monday morning, Daniel called in sick to work and made an appointment with Catherine Morrison for Tuesday afternoon. Then he drove to an electronics store in Round Rock, paying cash for a small GPS tracker, the kind marketed for keeping track of elderly relatives or teenage drivers. He installed it in Diana's Lexus while she was at work, carefully hidden inside the rear wheel well. Over the following 2 weeks, Daniel became someone he never thought he'd be, a spy in his own marriage. He tracked Diana's movements through an app on his phone. Most days followed predictable patterns: home to office, office to client meetings, back home. But on Thursdays, something changed. Every Thursday evening, Diana's car would park at the Meridian Hotel downtown for exactly 2 hours, then head home. Thursday was supposedly her late meeting night, end-of-week strategy sessions with the leadership team, she'd explained months ago. Daniel drove to the Meridian one Thursday evening and parked across the street. At 6:45 p.m., he watched Diana's Lexus pull into the parking garage. 15 minutes later, Jason Bradford's distinctive Porsche 911 followed. Daniel felt sick, but forced himself to stay calm. He opened his laptop and accessed the hotel's public Wi-Fi, then navigated to a service he'd discovered during his research. A website that allowed you to search recent credit card charges by merchant. It required a $50 fee and proof of identity, marketed toward people trying to track fraudulent charges. He entered Diana's credit card information, the one they shared, the one he had legitimate access to. The results showed a charge every Thursday evening for the past 3 months. $189 each time, the Meridian's standard room rate for a few hours. Daniel sat in his car documenting everything with photographs and screenshots. He felt like he was watching his life from outside his body, like this was happening to someone else. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you have not, because the ending of this story will blow your mind. And drop a comment below telling me what you think Daniel should do next. His Tuesday meeting with Catherine, Morrison had been enlightening and terrifying in equal measure. The attorney was in her mid-50s, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Her office in downtown Austin spoke of success. Mahogany furniture, diplomas from Georgetown, photographs with various Texas politicians. "Tell me everything," she'd said, and Daniel had. He'd played her the recording from the resort, shown her the credit card statements, explained about the GPS tracker and the Thursday hotel visits, laid out everything he'd discovered about Bradford's net worth and the company ethics policy. Morrison had listened without interruption, making occasional notes on a legal pad. When Daniel finished, she'd leaned back in her leather chair. "Mr. Ritchie, you've done remarkable investigative work. Most clients come to me with suspicions and accusations. You're coming with evidence." She tapped her pen against her pad. "However, we need to be strategic about this. Texas is a community property state, but proving adultery can significantly impact the division of assets and eliminate any possibility of her claiming alimony." "What do I need?" Daniel had asked. "More of what you already have. A pattern of behavior, multiple instances, ideally documented proof beyond just the voice recording, photographs, videos, witnesses, and we need to be very careful about how we obtain it. We can't break any laws or the evidence becomes inadmissible." Morrison had outlined a plan. Daniel would continue documenting for at least 4 more weeks, building an irrefutable case. She'd prepare divorce papers to be filed immediately after they had everything they needed. She'd also draft a letter to Preston and Associates' board of directors detailing Bradford's ethics violations. "Here's the thing about powerful men like Bradford," Morrison had said, her eyes gleaming. "They think they're untouchable. They get sloppy. That sloppiness is what destroys them." The consultation had cost Daniel $500, and Morrison's retainer would be $10,000 more. It was money he'd been saving for a down payment on a house. The house he and Diana had talked about buying in the suburbs. Maybe in Westlake or Bee Cave, somewhere with good schools for the kids they'd planned to have. Those dreams felt like they belonged to a different person. Now Daniel threw himself into his investigation with the same intensity he brought to his product management work. He created spreadsheets tracking Diana's movements. He documented every lie. Every time she claimed to be somewhere, she wasn't. Every time her phone location didn't match her stated whereabouts. He installed a small camera, perfectly legal since it was in his own home, in the living room bookshelf, angled toward the couch. He told himself it was just a precaution, but part of him wondered if she was bold enough to bring Bradford to their home. She wasn't, but she was bold enough to video chat with him on her laptop while Daniel worked late. Daniel discovered this by accident one Wednesday evening when he came home, early with a migraine. He'd used his key quietly, not wanting to disturb Diana if she was on a work call. He'd heard her voice from the bedroom, low, intimate, the same tone she'd once used only with him. He crept down the hallway and listened outside their bedroom door. "I can't wait until next week," Diana was saying. "Paris is going to be incredible." Daniel's heart stopped. Paris, The client presentation is just an excuse. Bradford's voice came through her laptop speakers. 3 days in the most romantic city in the world with you. I've already booked us a suite at the Ritz. What about Daniel? Diana asked, and Daniel pressed his ear closer to the door. What about him? Bradford laughed. Tell him it's a work trip. He never questions you. Honestly, Diana, sometimes I wonder why you stay with him. You're too ambitious, too exciting for that mediocre life. There was a pause, then Diana's voice softer. It's complicated, Jason. The divorce would be messy. And despite everything, Daniel is safe, predictable, he provides stability. You mean his income supplements yours? Bradford said dryly. I get it. But eventually you'll have to choose. I know, Diana said. After this Paris trip, I'll start laying the groundwork. Maybe I'll tell him I'm unhappy, that we should consider counseling. Then 6 months from now, I'll suggest separation. That way it looks like we tried. Daniel had stood in his own hallway, listening to his wife plan the destruction of their marriage, like it was a marketing campaign. Every word was calculated. Every emotion was strategic. She didn't love him anymore. Maybe she never really had. He was just a convenience, a safety net, someone to split bills with, while she built her real life with someone else. The migraine had become a full-blown cluster headache. Daniel had retreated quietly back to the front door, then made noise coming in. By the time he reached the bedroom, Diana's laptop was closed and she was reading a book, looking perfectly innocent. Hey, babe, she'd said, concerned. You're home early. Everything okay? Just a headache, Daniel had managed. I'm going to lie down. That night, while Diana slept peacefully beside him, Daniel had lain awake until dawn, his mind racing. Paris. They were planning a Paris trip together. How much was Preston and Associates paying for this client presentation? Or was Bradford footing the bill personally? The next morning, Daniel had gone through Diana's work email while she was in the shower. They knew each other's passwords, another remnant of the trust that had once defined their marriage. He found the trip details easily. A presentation to a potential French client. November 14th to 17th, Diana and Bradford representing Preston and Associates. The company would cover airfare and 1 hotel room. The email specified that executives were expected to share rooms to minimize costs. Daniel had almost laughed at the audacity. They were using company money to finance their affair, hiding it behind corporate expense accounts. He'd forwarded the email to his personal account, then deleted the sent message from Diana's outbox. Another piece of evidence for Project Phoenix. By week 3 of his investigation, Daniel had accumulated damning material. The original voice recording from the resort. GPS data showing 23 instances of Diana's car parked at the Meridian Hotel on Thursday evenings, credit card statements showing matching hotel charges, screenshots of text messages between Diana and Bradford that were carefully worded but clearly intimate, the Paris trip email, a photograph he'd taken from across the street showing Diana and Bradford entering the Meridian together, documentation of at least 15 instances where Diana lied about her whereabouts. Catherine Morrison had reviewed everything during their second meeting. This is excellent work. Mr. Ritchie, she'd said, genuine admiration in her voice. Most of my clients can't manage this level of documentation. You've built a case that any judge would find compelling. When do we move? Daniel had asked. After Paris, Morrison advised. Let them take that trip. Let them get comfortable and careless. Corporate expense fraud adds another dimension to this, especially if Bradford is using company funds for personal purposes. I'll prepare everything so we can file the morning after they return. Morrison had paused, studying Daniel carefully. So I have to ask, how are you holding up emotionally? This level of deception, the betrayal, most people would have confronted their spouse by now. Daniel had considered the question honestly. I feel numb mostly. Sometimes angry. Sometimes I can't believe this is my life. But I keep thinking about what my father used to say. Act in haste. Repent at leisure. If I'd confronted Diana that first night at the resort, I'd have been the emotional mess, and she'd have been the one planning strategy. This way I control the narrative. You're remarkably disciplined, Morrison had observed. No, Daniel had corrected. I'm remarkably betrayed. There's a difference. The days crawled by with surreal normality. Daniel went to work, attended meetings, delivered presentations. He came home to Diana, ate dinner with her, watched TV beside her, even made love to her when she initiated, though it felt mechanical now, performative. She had no idea. That was the part that amazed him. She looked at him across the breakfast table, chatted about her day, complained about difficult clients, asked his opinion on work decisions, all while planning a romantic, Parisian getaway with her boss. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Daniel's situation. 3 days before the Paris trip, Daniel made his final preparations. He met with Morrison one last time to review the divorce petition. It was comprehensive and brutal. Petition for divorce based on adultery. Request for fault-based property division. Demand for Diana's separate assets to compensate for her marital misconduct. Request for reimbursement of funds spent on the affair. Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts. A separate letter to be delivered to Preston and Associates Board of Directors outlining Bradford's ethics violations. Morrison had also prepared a second document, a lawsuit against both Diana and Bradford for alienation of affection. Texas was one of the few states that still recognized this claim, and while it was difficult to win, the threat alone could be devastating. The alienation suit probably won't succeed, Morrison admitted, but filing it sends a message. It makes this public. It destroys reputations. Bradford will have to explain to his board, his shareholders, his business partners why he's being sued for sleeping with a subordinate. Daniel had signed everything with a steady hand. The night before Diana left for Paris, she'd been almost giddy with excitement, packing her nicest clothes while pretending it was just for client presentations. "I'll miss you," she'd said, kissing him goodbye. "I'll miss you too," Daniel replied, and it wasn't entirely a lie. He would miss the Diana he'd thought she was, the woman who'd never existed. He watched her Uber pull away Friday morning, her clear-throat rolling designer luggage in the trunk. Heading to the airport for her flight to Paris, to romance and luxury, with another man, to the trip that would be her last as Mrs. Ritchie. Daniel had taken the day off work. He had things to do. First, he changed the password on their joint bank account and transferred half the money into a new personal account, perfectly legal in Texas before divorce papers were filed. Second, he packed up Diana's most important possessions, her jewelry, her photographs, her expensive shoes and handbags, and moved them to a storage unit he'd rented in his name alone, also legal, and it would prevent ugly confrontations later. Third, he scheduled a meeting with his own boss for Monday morning to request a temporary leave of absence. He'd need time to manage the divorce proceedings. Fourth, he called his parents in San Francisco, people he hadn't spoken to in 2 months. He told them everything. His mother cried. His father said, "Son, I'm proud of you for handling this with such dignity." By Friday evening, Daniel was ready. Diana would be in Paris now, probably at a romantic dinner with Bradford, drinking expensive wine on the company credit card, thinking she'd successfully managed her double life. She had no idea that by Monday morning, her entire world would collapse. Daniel sat in the condo that no longer felt like home, looking at his wedding ring. He'd worn it for 12 years without ever wanting to take it off. Now he twisted it slowly from his finger and set it on the kitchen counter. What happened next would shock everyone who knew them. The perfect couple, the ambitious power pair, Daniel and Diana Ritchie, who seemed to have it all together. But they didn't know what Daniel knew. They didn't know what was coming. And when it came, it would be devastating, complete and absolutely deserved. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of November day that made Austin feel almost like autumn. Daniel woke up at 5:30 a.m., made coffee and reviewed his checklist one final time. Diana was probably waking up in Paris right now, maybe ordering room service with Bradford, completely unaware that her life was about to implode. At 8 a.m. sharp, Daniel walked into Catherine Morrison's office. She was already there, looking sharp in a navy suit, with 3 paralegals surrounding a conference table covered in documents. "Are you ready, Mr. Ritchie?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Let's do it." At 8:15 a.m., Morrison filed the divorce petition with the Travis County Courthouse. Adultery, fraud, fault-based division of assets. Every detail Daniel had documented was now part of the public record. At 8:30 a.m., a process server delivered copies to Preston and Associates' main office, addressed to Diana Ritchie, to be held for her return. At 8:45 a.m., Morrison's office sent a detailed letter to Preston and Associates' Board of Directors. The letter outlined Jason Bradford's affair with his subordinate, Diana Ritchie, complete with expense account documentation, hotel receipts, and the upcoming Paris trip. It included copies of the company's ethics policy and noted that Bradford's stock options could be at risk if he'd violated corporate governance rules. At 9:01 a.m., Morrison filed the alienation of affection lawsuit against both Diana and Jason Bradford. This one made the local courthouse newsfeed, public record accessible to anyone, including journalists who regularly monitored high-profile business figures. By 9:30 a.m., clear's throat, the first dominoes had begun to fall. Daniel's phone rang. Diana's mother. "Daniel, what's happening?" Helen Ritchie's voice was panicked. "I just got a call from my friend whose daughter works at the courthouse. She said there's a divorce filing with your name on it." "It's true, Helen," Daniel said calmly. "Diana's been having an affair with her boss. I have evidence. I'm divorcing her." Helen gasped. "That can't be true. Diana would never—" "She's in Paris with him right now, Helen, on a fake business trip. I have recordings, GPS data, credit card statements. I'm sorry you had to find out this way." There was a long silence, then quietly, "Oh, Daniel." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." "So am I," Daniel said. "But I'm going to be okay." By 10:00 a.m., the Preston and Associates board had received Morrison's letter. Daniel didn't know this yet, but later he'd learned that the board had immediately convened an emergency meeting. Bradford was still in Paris, unreachable, and his second-in-command was frantically trying to get him on the phone. By 11:01 a.m., a reporter from the Austin Business Journal had picked up the courthouse filing and was making calls. Lawsuits involving prominent CEOs were newsworthy. An alienation of affection suit was even juicier. They were rare and scandalous. At noon, Diana called Daniel from Paris. He let it go to voicemail. "Daniel, what the hell is going on?" Her voice was high-pitched, panicked. "I just got 6 calls from my mother, my sister, and people at work. Someone said you filed for divorce. This has to be a mistake. Call me back immediately." Daniel saved the voicemail and didn't return the call. At 1 p.m., his phone rang again. Jason Bradford this time. Daniel answered. "Mr. Ritchie." Bradford's voice was tight, controlled fury barely contained. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're making a very serious mistake. These allegations are completely baseless, and you're opening yourself up to a defamation lawsuit. Are you in Paris right now, Mr. Bradford?" Daniel interrupted calmly. Silence. "Are you staying at the Ritz?" More silence. "Is Diana in the room with you right now?" "This conversation is over," Bradford snapped. "You'll be hearing from my attorneys." "I look forward to it," Daniel said pleasantly. "By the way, you should probably call your board of directors. I think they've been trying to reach you." He hung up. At 2 p.m., Daniel met with his boss, Rachel Torres, and requested a month of unpaid leave. He explained the situation briefly. Rachel had been to Daniel and Diana's anniversary party last year and was shocked but supportive. "Take the time you need," Rachel said. "And Daniel, I'm sorry this is happening to you. You're one of the good ones." At 3 p.m., the Austin Business Journal posted an online article. Preston and Associates CEO Jason Bradford named in alienation of affection lawsuit. It was brief but devastating, noting the courthouse filing, the alleged affair with a subordinate, and potential ethics violations. The article mentioned that Bradford was currently in Paris with the woman in question. Within an hour, it was being shared on LinkedIn and local business forums. By 4 p.m., Preston and Associates' stock price dropped 3%. By 5 p.m., Diana and Bradford had cut their Paris trip short and were on a flight back to Austin. Daniel learned this from Diana's frantic text messages. "Daniel, please, we need to talk. This is all a huge misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Just give me a chance. You're destroying my career, my reputation. How could you do this?" That last one almost made Daniel laugh. How could he do this? The audacity was breathtaking. He responded with a single text. See you in court. Tuesday morning, Diana arrived back in Austin. She went directly to their condo. Daniel had changed the locks the day before. She found her belongings in the storage unit, whose address he'd thoughtfully left taped to the front door. She called him, screaming, "You locked me out of my own home? This is illegal. I'm calling the police." "Call them," Daniel said calmly. "They'll tell you that in Texas, changing locks before a divorce is finalized is perfectly legal. Your name isn't on the lease anyway. We never got around to adding it, remember? You said it didn't matter because we were partners. Daniel, please, I have nothing to say to you." "Diana, all communication goes through my attorney. You should have received the divorce papers by now." He hung up. Tuesday afternoon brought more developments. Preston and Associates Board placed Jason Bradford on paid administrative leave pending an investigation into ethics violations. The company issued a carefully worded statement about taking all allegations seriously and maintaining the highest standards of corporate governance. Bradford's stock options, worth approximately $3 million and set to vest in 6 months, were frozen pending the investigation's outcome. Diana was also placed on leave. Unlike Bradford, hers was unpaid. Wednesday, the Austin Business Journal ran a longer piece. Preston and Associates Scandal highlights corporate ethics questions. It detailed the company's ethics policy, Bradford's previous sexual harassment settlement, and raised questions about the board's oversight. Preston and Associates' stock dropped another 5%. Thursday morning, Diana's attorney, a slick corporate lawyer named Richard Vaughn, contacted Catherine Morrison with a settlement offer. Diana would accept the divorce if Daniel agreed to a standard community property division and dropped the alienation lawsuit. Morrison presented it to Daniel over the phone. "What do you think?" she asked. "Counteroffer," Daniel said. "Diana gets 30% of marital assets instead of 50%. I keep the condo. She reimburses me for the money she spent on hotel rooms and romantic dinners, and the alienation lawsuit stays." "That's aggressive," Morrison noted approvingly. "She'll never agree." "Then we go to trial," Daniel said. "I have evidence that will humiliate her in open court. Recordings, photographs, GPS data. Let a judge decide if someone who committed adultery deserves an equal split." Morrison called back that afternoon. Vaughn had convinced Diana to accept the terms. Accept the alienation lawsuit. She wanted that dropped. "Tell them clear's throat. The lawsuit stays until Bradford settles separately." Daniel said, "I want him to pay for this too." By Friday, 1 week after Daniel had filed for divorce, the situation had evolved into something bigger than anyone expected. Jason Bradford's attorneys reached out to Morrison with their own settlement offer. Bradford would pay Daniel $75,000 to drop the alienation lawsuit and sign an NDA about the affair. Daniel laughed when he heard it. "Counteroffer $150,000. No, NDA. I won't actively publicize the affair, but I'm not signing away my right to tell my own story." Bradford's team came back at $100,000 with the NDA. Daniel held firm. "It's not about the money. It's about accountability. $150,000, no NDA, or we go to trial and I testify about everything in open court." The negotiations dragged into the following week. Meanwhile, Daniel had become something of a folk hero on certain corners of the internet. Someone had posted about the case on a Reddit forum about infidelity, and the story had gone viral. Hundreds of comments praised Daniel for his strategic approach, his documentation, his refusal to be emotional or impulsive. A local news station even reached out for an interview. Daniel politely declined, but allowed Morrison to provide a statement. "Mr. Ritchie simply wants accountability for the pain inflicted on him through his wife's affair with her supervisor. He conducted himself with dignity and allowed the evidence to speak for itself." Preston and Associates Board completed their investigation 2 weeks after the scandal broke. Their findings were damning. Bradford had violated multiple ethics policies, used company funds for personal purposes, and created significant legal and reputational risk for the organization. Jason Bradford was forced to resign as CEO. His stock options were cancelled entirely. He retained his 40% ownership stake in the company. but lost his leadership position and the respect of his industry peers. The board appointed a new CEO, a woman with an impeccable reputation and zero tolerance for misconduct. By mid-December, the settlements were finalized. Diana agreed to a divorce with 30% of marital assets, reimbursed Daniel $8,500 for affair-related expenses, and surrendered any claim to the condo.